Well, hello and welcome or welcome back to Read Becca for my weekly chatty catch-up on everything I've read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading, as well as a little bit of life chit-chat for roughly the current week. So I had, as a result of the quiet holiday week, a very high volume of reading and watching stuff. So I'm gonna try to not make this a super duper long video, but we have a lot to catch up on. So first, let's start with the holiday books that I read, I guess. First up, I picked up Susanna Clarke's The Wood at Midwinter. I hauled this very recently, or I haven't hauled this on video, but I purchased this very recently as a result of getting a gift certificate for Amazon. So I picked up this and one other book, and I'm very happy to have it on my shelves. It's tiny. This is a short story that was written for, I think, BBC Radio, regardless, a radio play, effectively, and was adapted into this very stunning, beautiful printed edition with artwork in it. And the artist, let me quickly find the name, is Victoria Sawden. So that's the illustrator. And it is just very light text and lots of illustrations all throughout. So it's a beautiful little item, but it's kind of insubstantial. And I don't terribly mind that. I enjoyed being back with Susanna Clarke's writing the most out of this. So this is very certainly a wintry tale. We are with two women in the woods, kind of wandering in the woods and talking about what one of them wants in the future. And that one is kind of an oddity. She has an affinity for animals and nature that is viewed as peculiar by the rest of the world. And as a result, she doesn't quite want, or she does want some of the things that society has put pressure on her about in terms of her role as a woman, but in a different way than you would commonly think of. And so I think there is a certain amount of connection with nature that is a strong theme there, and perhaps drawing a line toward Mother Nature and being a bridge between man and nature in terms of where this goes. But this is so insubstantial that I felt the initial first part of the story was ramping up and building to something, and then just all of a sudden in 2 pages, the story wrapped up. So it did feel a bit abrupt and incomplete. I felt like that latter half, exploring where she goes after leaving the wood, I felt that should have been given equal measure to the first half of the story. There was a pretty significant author's note at the back of this that I think builds so much context into why Clarke wrote this and what she was thinking. Her thought process did include the idea of women who are non-neurotypical existing in history. And so I enjoyed that exploration and could see that in the story. It's a lovely light read with beautiful illustrations, so it was well worth picking up on Christmas Day as a holiday read. Very strong, wintry vibes for sure. Then I went to another holiday read, a holiday romance, and that's Make You Mine This Christmas by Lizzie Huxley-Jones. This was probably my favorite romance of the year. I enjoyed it so much more than I even thought I would. So we are following Hav, who's Welsh but living in York, and she is very single, hasn't gotten quite over her last ex, who she was very serious with, and he was not very serious with her. She has a super quirky roommate, Ambrose, who is non-binary and kind of a fashion influencer, very heavy online presence that becomes a big element of the story. So one night she is out at a party with Ambrose and kind of party crashing, in fact, and meets a guy and kind of hits things off very lightly, though they're super awkward together. But someone shows up who knows him, and they pretend that they're dating because that person kind of assumes that they are based on how they're acting. And it works out that as they're leading into Christmas, both of them have kind of a need to have a partner at Christmas. So it's mutually beneficial for them to fake date over Christmas and for Hav to go back to Christopher, the guy's family manor home in the Cotswolds. She is from very humble lifestyle and is a little blown out of the water by his family's wealth and status a bit. And she really luxuriates in it and kind of takes advantage of it. And that was sort of delightful and fun rather than being kind of icky. But of course, there is a whole element to this fake dating, and what I loved about this is that it's not fake dating to real dating. It's fake dating the guy, and she falls for his sister. So the sister, they in fact have a meet cute before they meet at the house, and then showing up at the house, find out, oh my gosh, of course this girl I had this intense connection with is his sister. And so it's this whole trying to suppress the connection they had, being told off a little bit for kind of putting out some vibes when she's dating the brother. So that was kind of the main tension to the story. And along the way, because of this influencer thing with Ambrose, the roommate, there was this slow motion train wreck that really was giving me anxiety the whole way, every time it came up to do with social media. And I was like, you can see this train wreck coming from a mile away. And I guess, kind of mild spoiler, but it's something I would want to know, so I guess I'll put there. But the train wreck that you see coming does not actually come to fruition. There is no train wreck. It's handled so much more gracefully. There is third act conflict, but it's not that. It's things that are much more natural. It's handled with a much gentler hand, I think, and I really appreciated that so much. And I think what underlied everything and why there was a third act conflict was so much of people trying to be respectful and trying to handle things in a way that doesn't hurt other people. And I appreciated that very, very much. So I loved a lot about the representation in this as well. It's extremely diverse, but in a believable way and in a way that doesn't objectify. So Hav is fat, and there is specifically some elements to the story about that, about her having to get kind of high-end dresses for events that they're supposed to go to, and there being an assumption that she'll be able to just go into a shop and do that. And she's like, that's not reality. That's not how this works. And so I appreciated that. It was handled in a very real way. The element of class was handled really nicely, I think. We also have bisexuality and lesbian rep were all great as well. We had disability and chronic illness representation with the sister, the love interest. She's dealing with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, a joint disorder that means her joints sometimes dislocate, and she walks with a cane as well as a result of that. And so she's dealing with that continuous day-to-day disability. She's dealing with chronic joint pain as a result of that. So things like taking pills is a consistent throughout this. Her needing a little extra help or special accommodations came up, but was treated in a way that's highly normalized rather than anything that was an outlier. It was just sort of her life and her accommodations to her needs. So I really found that very respectful and excellent in terms of the handling. What else to say about this one? I think other than that, I would say spice rating. There's not a lot of spice in this. There is one open door sex scene, but other than that, it is pretty much just the family and the characters getting to know each other. It's extremely funny and quirky, and I loved how much Hav is kind of an awkward character, very unlucky and clumsy, and yet all of these kind of graceful, posh people do their best to accommodate and welcome her into their lives in good faith, and it was just a really beautiful story. So yeah, I enjoyed it so very much. All right, on to the non-holiday reads. So next up, I read Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. And boy, oh boy, I did not expect to love this as much as I did. I should have, because I really enjoyed Camp Damascus previously, but this was fantastic. And I did also listen to the audio, which has both a great narrator for the main story, who's phenomenal, perfect for the character, but also there are these scenes that are played through intermittently over the course of the story. Some of them literally are read like a script a bit. And those are narrated by other famous authors. So people I know and love, like T. Kingfisher and Sarah Gailey and Charlie Jane Anders and TJ Klune, all pop up, and I could recognize their voices. And so I was like listening for it, thinking I was going to miss it, and then I'm like, oh no, that is so obviously T. Kingfisher, because I do know her voice pretty well from seeing her in interviews and things like award speeches. So when they all popped up, I could tell, and it was just delightful little kind of Easter egg throughout. But this is the story of Misha, who is a scriptwriter, a writer in general, for a big studio, and he has a very successful TV series going on currently. And right off the bat, we're learning he has a successful series where he's kind of pushing the envelope toward depicting two of his characters on screen as a gay couple. And the studio are really pushing that the only way he can execute that is if he kills them off. They really don't want to see a happy ending for his characters. And at the same time as well, he's also experiencing this massive success in his career where, aside from that, he's been nominated for a big award and is kind of preparing for that too. So he's having all of the success but being put into constraints and being set a lot of expectations on how he does that he doesn't like. And so in his personal story, we're engaging with those elements of studio pressure. But in the bigger story outside of that, we're talking about things like AI and the algorithm, because in fact, there also is being developed by this studio a major film that is being performed by a posthumous actor. Not that was shot before he died, but that was fully filmed and created after he died. And that's becoming kind of more and more of a prominent thing, where the studio is increasingly taking power and ownership of the lives of everyone that works for them, where effectively they can use their image, they can use any work that they've done and do generative types of work from their original creations. And they have complete control over these intellectual properties rather than the actual creators. And so this is diving into the insidious nature of that while also exploring this really soft personal story. It felt like that should be too much to tackle. And initially, so we see Misha dealing with this right off the bat, leaving the office where he's been told he has to kind of kill off his characters that he has come to love. Walking outside, and kind of non-real things start happening to Misha. And increasingly so, to the point it becomes like a horror movie, and in fact some things tie into horror movies he has made in the past. There's a lot of controversy and it becomes a public thing, so it's not only happening to him, and that just sort of keeps going in a way that I really loved. And I saw a path forward for this that made sense and is partially how it ends. But it doesn't only end the way that I predicted it would. It does so much more in tying all of this together. The demands of the studios and the way that they cater toward an algorithm, or things like queer washing in big business. It just tied everything together so nicely, from all of these things about the insidiousness of corporate power, that giving them more power through AI and algorithms and the ways that can do harm were so well handled. I mean, I did not expect to have Chuck Tingle be one of my favorites this year, but this was very, very high up there. Probably my favorite horror book of the year. I enjoyed this so much. And again, the audio really, I think, contributed to that because it was very good. This is just a smart book that is extremely reminiscent of like an excellent Black Mirror episode, in that it's doing that horror with a science fiction futurism commentary on the real world. That's just so brilliant. So another knockout of the park by Chuck Tingle. And then finally, number 4 is the one I can't really express to you what the heck this book was about. And that is Saint of Bright Doors by Vajra Chandrasekera. I think I would most place this in secondary world urban fantasy, probably as the genre descriptor that gets closest, but it is kind of in multiple genres and very all over the place. So this starts with Feder, or we stay with Feder through the whole thing, but he is in a rural hinterland being raised by his mother, not clear whether she's his biological mother or like adoptive mother, but Mother of Glory is her name. And she is very kind of spiteful and has a certain way about how she's raising him, in that she's raising him with these foundational tenets things that are unforgivable, but that he must do. And it involves a lot of murdering, really. So at this point, he's young, and so as he's growing up, she's increasingly driving him, pushing him over the line, and more doing so. And this is supposed to end in him killing his father, the perfect and the kind, who is a god, or a demigod of some sort. So this is the very beginning of the book, and at this point, it all feels very like high fantasy world, right? But then he rejects everything his mother has set out for him, and he leaves for the city. And when he gets to the city, it's very much just like modern day real world. So there are cell phones and cars and texting and things like that. It's all very, very real world. But it's still really strange, clearly not our version of the real world. There's a lot of over-the-top bureaucracy, and the politics are extremely complex. And I can totally see why and how the execution of that got across the point, because very much of this feels like a commentary. It almost verges into dystopia, I would say. So we're talking about things like immigration and a police state, or even just policing in general in the real world, and the power of oppression that a government can have over its people. And so I really want to read this short passage so you can get a sense of the vibe of this just never-ending complexity and it being over the top in terms of how intentionally incomprehensible things are.
It's an in-house paper, so it's already a ministry employee, so Coma can just give them the job of hiding it somewhere at the convention center, whatever it's called this year. The Gods Faction Dedicatory Convention Center, Kadov says. I went to a concert in one of their halls a month ago. I got fucking confused finding it because it's been the King's Faction Dedicatory Convention Center ever since I got to Laureate, and I didn't know they were in the habit of changing the name. Everyone I asked for directions would just say they had no idea what I was talking about, because apparently the planters are in on the joke. Oh yes, Fetter says, remembering. He's seen the cowdung khaki uniforms and the feathered hats of the colonial police out there when he's visited Tomarin's house. The military and the paramilitary wings of the police traditionally belong to the King's Faction, but the colonial police belong to the Gods Faction. Technically, they belong to the Absent Queen, but the Gods Faction have been allied with her since the late Third Occupation. Fetter is annoyed to know some of these distinctions and histories, having picked them up from Cole and her pamphlets, and the tainted osmosis of life in Laureate. He misses the blessed ignorance of his early years in this city, when every jackboot was the same to him. Yes, the Gods Faction president runs the plantations now, so they should be the GDCC again. It doesn't make much difference which president is up there, but they just can't seem to resist the symbolic name changes. I've seen it happen at least 3 times. They share the snide laugh of the knowing outsider. Fucking Laureates, am I right?
So I don't think that spoils anything at all for you about what's happening in the story, but it gets across just how bureaucratically centered a lot of this plot is. So I don't really know if I can say what the story was about in the end. I think it's about the journey, because after coming to the city, Fetter gets involved with a group who I don't totally understand why, but they are a support group for children of these sort of gods they're feral children of these gods, and they've sort of left their duty more or less. So again, I didn't really understand that. Then he moves on to faking his identity to get involved with another group who are studying these bright doors. And that seemed like some combination of science and art, or performance art even. But they're also rebels or revolutionaries. And again, I don't really understand why. And from there, a number of things happen, but it results in him effectively becoming a refugee. And much to the passage that I read, during this refugee phase, he's wandering through these camps, and it's intentionally over the top, cumbersome, and impossible to account for the amount of districts where these refugees live, or it's kind of an internment camp place. And there are so many, the number is unfathomable. They don't make sense. He can't find his way through. The rules vary from place to place. And eventually he does wind up connected with a way out somewhat. But even then, once he's out, he recognizes that being on parole from this, he will never be free of the oppression that he's been put under by being in this sort of refugee state, more or less. Or being treated as an illegal person, really. And things get really weird from there because we're kind of back with the sort of mythic side of things with this god entity and connectedness with that and ritual, that kind of religious and mythical side of this. But I think the most prominent thing is that I did just keep asking why, and that was what left me wanting more. And we didn't really get total answers to the why of things throughout any of this. I don't think the bright doors aspect was ever really clear to me. Like, there is that big chunk at the beginning where he's with people that are trying to study these bright doors and trying to understand these bright doors in the world. I couldn't tell you why they are studying them, what's important about them, other than sometimes they open and almost nobody ever sees it and weird things come through. And I don't feel like we got a real sense to that. Over long portions of this book, the element of the bright doors is totally not even talked about, not present at all, and then we kind of come back to it a little bit at the end. But it doesn't feel like that's the driving force of the book, weirdly. So I don't know why the title is what it is. I don't know a lot of things about the world building. It was a little hand-wavy. But at the same time, I very much like this book. I think it's extremely strange, extremely imaginative. The only thing I could even remotely compare it to, I happened to read in the recent past, was Astonishing the Gods by Ben Okri, which is also extremely dreamlike and strange and incomprehensible. That one, I also didn't understand what the point of the book was, but I really, really enjoyed it. That is a much shorter book, and I think I liked it just a fraction more than I liked this. But this was still, for me, just so creative and imaginative that I love the ideas behind it and what it was exploring and the strange ways it was exploring those things. So I gave this a 4-star, even though I still don't really know what it was about. So, yeah, I said I was going to try to make this short, and I haven't. So quickly, the books that I am reading, I'm working on Salt Slope by Julia Armfield, a short story collection. I'm listening to The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters on Audio as well. And hopefully we'll finish both of those before the end of the year. Onward to things I watched. I think I can blaze through those. I watched a couple of Christmas holiday competition shows. I watched the Lego Masters holiday version. I also watched the Great British Bake Off holiday episodes. Both enjoyed. I guess random other holiday shows. I have been randomly watching a lot of episodes on YouTube of Richard Osman's House of Games. Obviously famous author, but he was a TV writer before that. He runs this kind of, it's a British quiz show, basically, with comedians on it. And so it's very funny, but there have been posted a lot of the seasons, specifically their holiday episodes, and so I've been watching through those. I've watched a couple of Christmassy movies. I watched That Christmas, an animated movie on Netflix recently that has a star-studded cast, Jodie Whittaker, Fiona Shaw, Rhys Darby. It was great, heartwarming, like family animated film. Very, very fun, very, very sweet. I also rewatched the Hogfather miniseries, which is an adaptation of the kind of Christmas sort of themed book from the Discworld by Terry Pratchett. Another one that I love. I've probably watched this 4 or 5 times, and I love it every time. It's so impeccably good. It's wonderful. I don't often rewatch things, so if I've watched this many times, you know it's something I love. Then I watched a kind of weird pair. First, Heim to Yule and Odio in Natale. So one is Norwegian and the other is Italian. But they are the same show. So those are both on Netflix, and one translates to Home for Christmas, and the other one is I Hate Christmas. So why they changed the name, I don't know. But both of them are about a woman who is 30, who is single, hasn't gotten over her boyfriend of a long time, and is not actively dating, but she lies to her family because they are putting so much pressure on her for being single, and tells them that she has a boyfriend and she's going to bring him to Christmas. So it becomes this whole like effort to find someone very, very quickly within a few days. I think it's less than 2 weeks to bring home for Christmas. And the approach is interesting because it's very different in each show. And I guess this should tell you, I finished Home for Christmas, the Norwegian version, and I did not finish the Italian version. So the Norwegian version, really what sold it is that the main character feels very like quirky and relatable while still being very pretty. And it's believable. The Italian version, I didn't feel like the main character really had kind of any personality other than just being a very pretty person. So yeah, she didn't have the relatability factor. And also a lot of the people around her seemed very snooty and judgy. And maybe that's me reading into their being Italian, I don't know. But it was a different vibe entirely. And I think that was probably the thing I liked the most that kept me watching as long as I did of the Italian version, is seeing the differences in how they executed the Christmas traditions and the dating culture of the two places. So in the Norwegian version, like the first dates that she goes on is she goes speed dating basically, whereas in the Italian version she goes to this very high-end cooking course that's mostly, well, that's all men other than her, and they kind of are very chauvinistic. So there was that a lot. There was a big difference in the culture of flirting out in public, I think, that was depicted in both shows. So like that was a massive difference. I don't think like there was hardly any flirting out in public in the Norwegian show. And also, of course, like the experience of Christmas is just depicted very different because the Norwegian show, it's like snowy everywhere and everyone is always just very cold all the time, you know, like they're not cold, but like they're doing things like going to the sauna and they're traveling by kick sled and stuff like that probably is part of normal life. But in the Italian, they're like going out and it's completely clear outside. There's a whole thing in the first scenes where they're doing a nativity, but it's in a gondola and they're like floating it through on the gondola, and they drop the baby in the water. I would think you would not do that, but hilariously, fairly recently, my buddy Reed of Edgar Allan Poe, we read a story that he wrote that involved a baby being dropped in Venice into the water. And so I was like, oh, I recall that. It seems like you would be a little bit more careful with babies. When I say baby, not a real baby, I mean the baby Jesus for the nativity was dropped in the water. Anyway, so I have rambled on about this way too much, but it is an interesting streaming thing that is happening now, that we're getting these different versions of the same show across a single platform and being able to kind of see that. And it's a very weird, like uncanny experience to have that pop up and be like, I just watched that. Why is this the same thing but different? And I've had that happen now on Hulu since this with High Potential. Both the American version and a foreign version have shown up there. And I was like, wait a minute, I've seen exactly that description and now you're pushing it at me in a different show. Weird. Yeah, so I think that covers everything that I have watched this week. Onward to the very little stuff lifey. It's been a really quiet week, so I don't have much to catch up here, thankfully. But I did, excitingly, get my 2025 planner, and I usually get them at Target, and so I really like the Blue Sky brand, and they are pushing a line this year at Target with Marie Kondo. So this is a super duper cute one. I like these small planners, but it has some like tidying suggestions or thoughts at the beginning, which I like, but I don't know if I will use. More importantly, this has the usual month layout where I do track all my finishes on the month layout, but day to day I track everything I read and watched and stuff on the week layout. And so exciting! It has the full day for every day of the week, including the weekend. Usually these smaller planners only give half space for the weekend days, and I hate that because as someone who is tracking a hobby, I do most of it, the highest volume, on the weekends, so I have the most to write down on the weekends. And finally, one has the space for that. So I'm kind of excited about that. Additionally, I guess commentary on YouTube. Within the past couple weeks, I don't know if this is a phased rollout, so I might be getting this at a different time than other people, or if it was an all-in-one-go rollout, but I'm very annoyed about changes on YouTube. So they have added to kind of the section where we have all our content an inspiration tab, which really pisses me off. So it's basically algorithmically generated ideas for videos you could make. And they're all low quality, they're all kind of clickbait listicles, that kind of thing, very low energy, low effort sort of stuff. Yeah, so kind of gross. But then also they added something that I'm really, really unhappy about, but currently at least you can opt out of it. They added a checkbox to allow your content to be used for AI training. So letting an AI learn off of your videos that you've posted. And again, that just really pisses me off that that's even there. Like, I do not want it to even be in the background, even if I can disable it right now. I hate the way that things are going where AI is just slowly, insidiously creeping into every single thing. And to what we talked about up front with Bury Your Gaze, it's deeply frustrating. Even with the opt-out option, it's defaulted to opt-out as far as I could tell. But I can just see at some point in the future them in the background tinkering and enabling it without really flagging it to us that they're doing that. Yeah. It's a thanks I hate it moment for sure about changes to YouTube. It's very frustrating. Yeah, so I think that's it for my week. I allowed this to go on way too long in terms of talking. I talked about the books way too much, but that's all right. That's what we're here for. I'm not on any time constraint other than whatever my phone can hold. So we will wrap it up there, I think. So this is probably not my last video that will be posted for the year, but it is probably my last time filming for the year. So I will leave you all with my wishes that you have a wonderful end of the year in the few days that we have remaining, and wishing you a happy, happy new year. And I'm so excited to dive into 2025, though I can't believe I am saying 2025. Feels like the future, doesn't it? So that is it for me today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the weekend and remainder of the year. Thank you so very much for watching.